takeaway food, or if you're out for a meal, ask the question. And if the business cannot tell you about the food allergens, you've got to walk away. That's the simple advice, and it's the safest advice.
Hello and welcome to the Cost of Living Newscast from Kent County Council. In this episode, our journalist Elizabeth Matsangu is speaking to Head of Kent Scientific Services Mark Rolfe and Kent Trading Standards Officer John Scott on the rise of food fraud and what consumers should look out for in order to stay safe. For more advice and tips, click the subscribe button below, follow Kent County Council's public protection or business advice accounts on social media, or sign up to receive scam alerts or business bulletins by email. Links below.
Hi, Mark and John. Thank you for joining us today. So, Mark, what advice do you have about buying food and making your money go further?
There's a number of things that we can do as families to make our food budget go a little bit further. What some people might be considering doing, for example, is perhaps buying a product which is not their usual product, but is still the same kind of food. So it might be changing from a premium brand of baked beans to maybe a supermarket brand or a more value brand. Sometimes cheaper products are actually just as good for you. They're just as nutritious. They contain everything you need. Sometimes, however, some of the cheaper products, to get the flavour right, they have higher levels of things like salt or sugar and so on. So actually, if you're going to change brands, it's worthwhile just looking at the ingredients list or looking at the nutritional labelling, almost the traffic light scheme on the product, just to make sure that what you're buying in the new brand is still as good for you as the other brand. Also, really importantly, if you or anyone in your family has got any kind of food allergy, absolutely, if you're going to change brands or change products, make sure you check the ingredients list to make sure that the new product that you're going to buy doesn't have something in it which a member of your family might be allergic to. There's a lot of talk as well about the difference between fresh fruit and vegetables and maybe tinned or frozen fruit and vegetables. Tinned and frozen fruit and vegetables actually have a real advantage in terms of cost savings and budgeting because they don't go off. And the government advice is that tinned and frozen fruit and vegetables are still part of your 5-a-day. They're still good for you. They're still nutritious, but they can prevent a lot of food waste. Another thing that people might be considering is changing the place they do their shopping. But it's really important if you're going to move to check that the establishment that you're going to move to has a decent food hygiene rating. In England, there's not actually a law which says people have to display their food hygiene ratings, but every food business has to have one. So if it's not displayed, then why not is the question. You can always check it on your local authority's website anyway. But actually, if it's a low food hygiene rating, so anything less than a 3, then I'd be a little bit cautious about whether that business is one where I could be confident that what I'm buying is being supplied in a hygienic way. And that goes for shops and retail establishments, but it also goes for restaurants and takeaways and food providers as well.
And what tips do you have about storing food?
In the UK, the last figures that I've seen around food waste suggest that 70% of food waste occurs in people's homes. So anything that we can do to store food better in a safe way actually is going to save people money in the long term. The first thing to understand in terms of storing food safely is the difference between a use-by date that you'll see on food packaging and a best-before date. They are the only 2 dates that we should now see on food. Use-by dates are really important. They're tested by manufacturers. They're scientifically backed up so that actually food after the use-by date has the potential to be unsafe. So we really shouldn't be looking at storing food beyond its use-by date or consuming food beyond its use-by date because it will cause harm. Best-before dates are a completely different thing. Best-before dates are nothing to do with food safety. They're about quality. So eating or consuming food after its best-before date might mean that your biscuits aren't quite as crunchy or as snappy as the latest fresh ones, but they're still going to be nutritiously valuable. They're still going to be safe to eat. Freezing food actually is also a really good way of preserving it. So freezing effectively sort of presses the pause button on food that's about to go off. If you're freezing goods that have, for example, a use-by date on them, freezing is a way to pause that use-by date. Just one other bit in terms of storage. We talked about tinned food and how good tinned food can be in terms of the fact it doesn't go off. if you open a tin of tinned food and you're not going to use the whole tin, actually it's a really good idea to empty the contents of the tin into a food quality plastic container to store it in the fridge. Because once a tin is opened, what happens is that air and oxygen gets into the tin, and it is possible for the metals and the constituents of the tin to start to leach into the food. The other thing I would say is that there is a huge amount of advice for consumers available on the Food Standards Agency's website to help people look after their food, keep it safe, and therefore stretch your budget so that you can have the most food available to feed your family.
John, what exactly is food fraud?
Food fraud really is when somebody is substituting food and the consumer believes they're getting the genuine food product, whether it be the species of fish, whether it is the luxury item, champagne, Scotch whisky, and that has been substituted or adulterated by the supplier. Unfortunately, there is criminal gangs who look to try and disadvantage consumers on a wide scale. The alcohol can be tainted with chemicals. As I say, species can be adulterated. It's not what you think you're paying for. So I think the message that we've got about food fraud is avoid it. Avoid anybody who offers you a food in an unusual area. If it's in the pub, if you're going along and somebody's got it in the back of a van and they've got food and it's unlabeled, there's no ingredients, then again, that's specifically something that you would want to avoid, because food legislation is quite straightforward. There is mandatory information that's required to protect us on the label. There's information about calories, there's information about allergens, there's information that tells you the weight of the food, which makes you make a judgment as to how much you want to spend. Now, if that information is missing, then, as I say, really you should start to think, this is not something that I want to buy.
And why is food fraud a particular concern for those with allergies?
There's over 2 million consumers within the UK who've got a food allergen. 1 in 12 school children suffer from an allergy. You've got to be sure that what you're eating is transparent. And when you go for a meal, you've got to make sure that you're communicating that allergen to the business. And likewise, if you're buying a takeaway food, again, you've got to ask that question. So if there's any kind of delay or lack of information, you should walk away. And it's similar as well, because so many people now buy online, and we buy a lot of food online. If you buy something on social media and it's a low price, do you know if this business is registered? No, you don't, because there's no business there. It's just a name. It's just an email. Do you know if that food is safe for you to consume? No, you don't. If you've got allergens, is the information on the packaging? So right away, there's a catalogue of things that you want to avoid. So I think our advice is go to known businesses, look at the label, be satisfied if you're an allergen sufferer. The information is there. If it's verbal, if it's takeaway food, or if you're out for a meal, ask the question. And if the business cannot tell you about the food allergens, you've got to walk away. That's the simple advice, and it's the safest advice. And as I say, the added bit is, when you think you're buying a present for another person, if they've got an allergen, you've got to find that information out, as I say, because you do not want to contribute to any reaction that they may have. And as I say, that the food itself may be safe, but for an allergen sufferer, without that information, it's potentially lethal. And I think that's the message that we want to get across.
We can't take action without your reports. We need everyone who comes across them to speak up and report scams and criminals. Even if you've seen a scam many times before, your reporting can help us target our resources and warn and protect others. If you have information on doorstep criminals, counterfeit, fake or illegal goods, illicit tobacco, loan sharks or underage sales, contact the charity Crimestoppers on 0800 555 111 you'll stay 100% anonymous, always. To report scams and get advice on consumer issues, call the Citizens Advice Consumer Helpline on 0808 223 1133. Thank you for helping us protect Kent from scammers and criminals.